Hi, I'm Peter Cramp and I'm behind the Economics Factory resources. I've been thinking about topics that might be due to be tested in the AQA A Level Economics exam this summer. Now, this might be because they've not been tested for a while, or it might be because they're highly topical. This video is going to help you, but please do remember to revise thoroughly across the entire specification. So, turning to due topics for Paper 1 Micro. There are very few concepts left that haven't been tested at all on Paper 1 since the current specification was first examined in 2017. But the law of diminishing returns is one, so it wouldn't be surprising to see that feature, probably in a 9 or 15 mark question. Now, the extension of markets into new areas, a market for blood, is mentioned in the specification, is another concept that hasn't been tested. Could the rationing, signalling and incentive functions of prices make a difference here? Beyond this, we look towards topics that haven't been tested in a while, and one of these is perfect competition. Last year's theory of the firm questions were about the more concentrated end of the market structure spectrum. There were questions about oligopoly and monopoly. At the more competitive end, monopolistic competition has been tested relatively recently, so perfect competition may be in the picture this year, and related concepts such as price taking and the effect of this on a firm's revenue curves. A related possibility is contestable markets, which brings into play questions about deregulation. Can the government make markets work better by removing the barriers to entry? A 15 marker explaining the main sources of barriers to entry, structural, strategic and statutory, would be lovely, followed by a 25 marker evaluating the extent to which removing barriers to entry would make markets work well. And finally, in the area of competition and contestability, the Competition and Markets Authority is currently investigating the market for the services of vets. This could provide a great context for a data question. The labour markets and distribution of income and wealth section of a specification usually provides at least one of the 5 questions on the paper, and sometimes more. The areas I'm most looking towards here include the causes and effects of poverty and policy to alleviate it. Child poverty is a particularly likely setting for a question. The distribution of income and wealth, note the difference between the two, is certainly an area due for testing. Wealth hasn't been on the paper since 2018. It's possible that questions could look at why wealth is much more unequally distributed than income, and whether intervention should try to make the distributions of income and wealth more equal. Just pausing briefly. Each year I use my due topic analysis to write new practice papers for AQA Economics. You can access the 2026 papers and the papers from recent years, as well as a model answer to every past paper question since 2017, explanations of all the multiple choice answers, my revision guides, and much more with a membership of the AQA Student Exam Club. Memberships are for an individual student and run until after the paper 3 exam in the summer. Simply scan the QR code now to subscribe. Moving on to Paper 2 Macro, the due topics get harder to pick out. It's easier for examiners to cover the whole specification in macro because topics are so interlinked, so there's very little that hasn't been tested within the last few years. This said, the determinants of a level of investment as a component of aggregate demand is one topic that hasn't come up, and the UK's poor investment record and apparent slowing of trend growth make this a likely area, despite some overlaps with productivity, which was tested a couple of years ago. How about a 15 marker on the determinants of either investment or trend growth, and a 25 marker evaluating the costs and benefits if the UK were to achieve a higher trend rate of growth? I've got a big hunch on NEETs and youth unemployment. This is so topical, and 1 in 8 young people is now not in education, employment or training. And this makes it a really likely topic for a context question. Moving on to financial markets, Students often find this section of a specification a bit scary, but the examiners do have to ask questions in this area, and the effective revision of it can serve you really well. A year or so ago, the government announced the Leeds reforms, which centre on deregulation of financial markets. The aim is to help the UK further capitalise on its comparative advantage in financial services. However, deregulation may allow banks to take on a higher degree of risk, possibly making future bank failures and a new financial crisis more likely. This is classic 25-marker material. In international economics, the case for free trade and possible justifications for protectionism are highly topical due to Donald Trump's tariffs. And though there have been plenty of questions which have given students an opportunity to use comparative advantage, the concept has not directly been the topic of a question. And remember the overlap with the financial markets topic, given that we've got a comparative advantage in financial services. Finally, the difference between economic growth and economic development seems due for testing, while the role of aid in promoting development could well feature for the first time. Looking back on previous years, I'm pleased that my due topics analysis has allowed me to write practice AQA economics papers, which have been pretty close to the real thing. I actually do have a crystal ball, one which was given to me by a student grateful that some of the questions on my practice papers had been almost word for word what had come up on the actual paper. Now, do remember what I've said, you've got to revise thoroughly across the entire specification. But it does make sense to give a little bit more revision time to these topics which seem more likely. And now we've had a think about those due topics for 2026, I've got plenty of further support for your revision this summer. A membership of our AQA Economics Student Exam Club is a great place to start.